What's going on, guys? TG or ThunderGod here. Got a pretty interesting video. Got Virtue here. Say what's up.
What's up, y'all? It's Virtue.
Today we got an Edo Tensei free-for-all. In the interest of saving time, I'm going to just lay out the quick rules, because you might be wondering, how does an Edo Tensei free-for-all work if they're all Edo Tensei? We're just going to say whoever gets quote-unquote defeated just gets sealed in the alliance. Like, the alliance put these guys inside a barrier and said, bet you gotta fight to survive and stuff like that. So assume that for the sake of making it work. We'll be compartmentalizing this video into rounds, each round with each group of Edos that fought alongside each other against each company of the alliance. We'll then take the winners of each round and throw them into a royale, which is round 2. Like and subscribe if you're new here, or don't. It is what it is. Check out Virtue. And with that being said, let's get into the video. So for the first round pick, we have the group Haku, Zabuza, Gari, Pakura, and the 7 Ninja Swordsmen. The strongest generation, I might add, the 7 Ninja Swordsmen. This is a pretty interesting group starting off. Now, we'll start with this. Haku should be the most impressive from a speed perspective and the hardest to catch for this group. Yeah. On top of displaying the best speed feats, you know, just being able to perceive, react, and cut through, or like intercept Raikiri Kakashi via like his light mirrors. It's pretty impressive stuff, so that's obviously going to be a big issue for a lot of these fighters. Zabuza's pretty self-explanatory, just kind of objectively below Kakashi, but still has a good showing. Zabuza, I want to say Zabuza does a lot in this encounter, but a lot of his arsenal actually doesn't matter too much. The hit and miss that he does a lot in character shouldn't be a big issue for Haku or the 7 Ninja Swordsmen, as that's a very common jutsu. I'll put the rank up on screen for what exactly that jutsu is. I believe it's a C rank jutsu, but it isn't that crazy as far as the hit and miss, so that shouldn't really, you know, give any advantages. It would afford some advantages for Gari and Pakura, which are kind of interesting as well. Gari is kind of interesting with this explosion release. It's not that crazy. He's shown to be relative to like base Lee for a short time, but quickly gets overwhelmed. Again, nothing outside of Haku's abilities, able to like block blows from Guy and Lee together. But, you know, so showing some great physicality on that front and great reaction feed. So I can't see that being too much, as long as the explosion release not really having that great of showings. Pakura is more interesting. I'm going to come back to her in a little bit. I think she has some good stuff to talk about. I will say, though, to kind of go to the 7 Ninja Swordsmen, most of these guys suck. I'm going to be honest. It's sad to say they kind of got hoed over by the manga and stuff like that. We were talking about this. We think Mangetsu is probably the most impressive of them. Do you want to talk about Mangetsu real quick?
Yeah, so Mangetsu has a lot of like really good like implications throughout the series, like him being able to wield all the blades. Kisame seems to hold him to like a really high regard. Like he thinks Suigetsu is like a prodigy, but he thinks he's like a nothing in comparison to Mangetsu. Yeah. And I mean, like Mangetsu, like he could grab all their weapons and stuff. Which becomes like really interesting because he also has Suigetsu's hydrification, which is pretty crazy, because it's gonna kind of allow him to not really have to interact or take many of these attacks from any of the 7 Ninja Swordsmen. Like we were talking about like Haku versus Mangetsu, like what if he was like inside the mirrors and she's like, or he, my bad, is like shooting all the needles down and Mangetsu's just like liquefying through them all. What happens there? Like does Haku just be like, all right, this ain't working, and he just leaves? Maybe. I will say though that I think the liquidation is kind of like Kamui, where it has like a chakra threshold of like what it uses. Yeah. But it's just really low.
But Mangetsu is interesting, we were talking about, because like Haku's obviously one of the big juggernauts here, because no one's gonna be able to catch him on this battlefield, and the fact he's pretty much just gonna like, you know, be reflecting ice mirrors everywhere. We even see the range of it when he's able to pop up behind size bird, just neg it instantly and stuff like that. So he's definitely probably the biggest threat from a speed perspective and stuff like that. You could maybe argue like his AP might be kind of debatable due to his like ice Senbon, like how potent are they really? Obviously, it destroy one of size ink birds, but how impressive is size ink birds like from a durability perspective?
Yeah. Like no, they get like beat up by like Choji and stuff like in the
it's pretty bad. So. And I will say too, not to discount the other 7 Ninja Swordsmen, but they just are not that impressive, honestly speaking. If you want an example of this, in the manga, it's not shown what happens to them. In the anime, base Kakashi and base Guy fight a few of them. And it like they fight Kushimaru and I believe Jinpachi. But point is, they're able to fight these dude in a suppressed, maybe fatigued state. It's not really pushed to their limits, and they actually only lose that encounter due to a lack of intel. So from a stat perspective, the Ninja Swordsmen aren't really that impressive. And even then, like, it's not like their weapons would also be that impressive against Mangetsu. Only, like, the dual Raiton blades would really be an issue. And at that point, the individual who's using that got beat up by Omoi. So it's not even as if they're really going to be on Mangetsu's level anyway. And the reason Mangetsu's like cool is because he can really just flip-flop between any of their weapons. Like Gilgamesh from Fate, if you've ever seen that. Like he'll just have all these swords on his side of the battlefield and just be able to choose and stuff like that. In which case you get into some interesting scenarios and stuff like that. Like there's a lot that can be done with Mangetsu in this situation. He has a lot to avoid a lot of these potential problems. I think this is also evidenced by the fact that he was the last one to get sealed in this company, which also displays how impressive he was. Pakura is also pretty interesting. She also has this couple with Amoy. She has Scorch Release, which is actually kind of impressive because it humidifies the air, which could maybe argue like counteracts the dampening of the air with the hidden mist. So that might potentially like negate some of Zabuza's ability. And like using that jutsu, not that it was going to be the most effective. It might also have a hindrance on Haku's Ice Mirrors. That might also like work into melting it. Although again, the density of Haku's Ice Mirrors is kind of debated. Like we know he can reinforce them with chakra and it can tank like Genin Sasuke's fireballs. But again, like, that's Genin Sasuke's fireballs. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's the most impressive. So there's really a lot that can be done in this discussion. Like, what do you think about like Haku in this discussion against all these fighters?
Okay, if I'm being completely like honest here, I think he low-key beats them all up. I don't think any of them can really contend with him much other than Mangetsu. Yeah. I think Mangetsu is, again, like the top of all of them, but I think Haku's definitely the top, and I think one, he's just far faster than all of them, and his Kekkei Genkai with the needles is gonna be too much. Now, one thing that's kind of weird to bring up about Haku is his relationship with Zabuza, and what's kind of weird is Haku may actually like die to protect Zabuza. So maybe you could say that like Haku would actually be able to clear all these. Maybe, if you do think he can beat Mangetsu or not, it just kind of depends. Yeah. That one I could probably go either way. But it just kind of depends. But you could say that Haku would beat them and then just like kill himself or have Zabuza kill him, just to kind of sacrifice for Zabuza. But I mean, either way, like, what do you do then? Do you just take like the weaker Zabuza and then push him? Yeah. Like, I don't really think that'd be fair. I think Haku like is the more deserving guy that should. Yeah. That should move on.
There's a couple interesting scenarios we were talking about too. Like, what if Mangetsu grabs like the Helm Splitter that was like shattering like any defense? Like it's stated to be like the strongest arm of the 7 Ninja Swordsman, and like slaps Haku's Ice Mirror with it when he's not present in it. What happens then? You know what I'm saying? Like, does it shatter? And that also does put into question like Haku's Ice Mirror durability, which could become a potential issue. There's also like the Blast Sword Shibuki, again, may present some issue. It's like a 10 of paper bombs rolled up and like it's like a toilet paper roll that he just slaps people with. It's kind of funny. Yeah. So there is a couple
AoE like counters. Yeah, AoE counters.
Yeah, and then it's like there's a lot of variables to that. So there is the potential for Haku going down if he does try to go protect Zabuza. In which case, it does seem like Mangetsu has like a really good shot due to like his pretty much if Haku goes down, nobody can really stop Mangetsu. That's a bottom line. Even Bakura shouldn't really present an issue just because Mangetsu has access to like all their weapons and he'll just have a wide range of arsenal. Otherwise though, like no one can really combat Haku's speed at this point and really catch him. And the fact that like Zabuza and him are more than likely in this scenario probably gonna have like that mini alliance really kind of spells disastrous for a lot of people in this situation. And again, I don't want to like overlook a lot of the 7 Ninja Swordsmen, but they're really just not that impressive. Unfortunately, we just don't see enough of them. It's just a blank, like, it's a lot of blank information, and the ones that are shown also aren't that impressive. Like the minute Kakashi does unveil his Sharingan and uses Shidori, he just like takes down Kimmimaro. You know what I'm saying? Like instantly. Like it's not really an issue. So
I don't want to like talk about Mangetsu too much, but just like
bro. He's so cool, bro. He's so sick.
Yeah. But before like we close this out, one thing that is really interesting is him being able to wield like all 7 blades is kind of a crazy statement. We were talking about this just before this, but him being able to wield like Samehada is really important because one thing to note about Samehada is most people give Kisame like fast speeds, but the reason why I actually don't believe in this, and we've talked about this before in a video, but essentially when B fights like Kisame, Samehada is actually the one doing all the reacting for Kisame. It's kind of like Kisame's not really doing anything. There's several instances where Kisame's getting completely blitzed. There's one time where he has his sword and he's going like a crossbody angle and his hand is like up by his head, and B like charges, and then Kisame literally can't even move. But like Samehada ducks completely under, and it hits him, and that's when he drains like the cloak. So Mangetsu being able to wield Samehada could imply like a relativity, which gets him really really impressive, to be honest, and it means that he might be able to like react to B. So that's just like a little side note for like Mangetsu's speed, if you want to argue like a different higher route with that stuff.
No, I mean, it's also just impressive too from like a chakra quantity standpoint, because we know like Samehada is more so like attracted to those higher chakra quantities. With B, it might be a little different because he more so liked the taste of B's chakra because it was like octopus flavored and stuff like that. So he's kind of addicted off the sushi roll. But with, you know, you could make some assertions there. So the fact that Mangetsu really is able to do this, I think, is a pretty impressive feat, and the fact that he can like pretty much neg any and all attacks to hit him unless it's like a high, you know, level frequency, unless it's Raiton, which in case, you know, he just is gonna get countered by, or if it's just like a high base chakra volume attack, then he's just gonna get overwhelmed and not be able to liquefy through it. In which case though, we do see kind of the top two dogs that could potentially have a case here being Mangetsu and Haku. So we'll just throw those two as our winners and then like talk about these two in like the next round. Next round, I know that was a while, guys. Don't worry, these are actually a lot shorter. The next round we have Datara, Sasori. We'll just give Sasori a random shinobi to use as a puppet. And Sai's brother. I'm going to be honest with you. It's kind of bad how clear Datara gets here. Because Sasori, he doesn't have his insta-kill poison. He doesn't have his human puppet body implied to be stronger than the third Kazekage. He doesn't have the third Kazekage. He doesn't have any of this. And then you also, so, you know, on top of Sasori versus Datara, regardless of where you stand on that, the fact that that isn't, you know, a debatable topic is all you really need to say is that Datara has all this stuff, all his basic arsenal, whereas Datara can make more clay, whereas Sasori has none of it. And also you have Sai's brother, who does nothing at all. Like he's literally the puppet Sasori controls. So it's like, what do you really like? What, you know what I mean? Like, what do you say for this one?
I'm just gonna be honest. I completely agree. I think Datara slams. Like everything that made Sasori strong, he just doesn't have here. Like one thing that gave Sasori his speed was the way that he could leeway all of his attacks from really far distances. So like he wouldn't have to react that much, and he was only just like small finger movements. But now he has some random shinobi who would probably just get blown up by Datara, like actually instantly. And who is Sai's brother? Like, what's he doing? Like, he's doing nothing. Like, I think Datara, he has all of his bombs. So, like, a C1 or, like, a C2, and I probably won't even use a C3, would absolutely just decimate Sasori. And I have my own opinions on Sasori and where he actually scales on, like, speed. And it's not that high, to be honest. It's nothing crazy. So I definitely think Datara takes this one pretty easily.
No, I'll also add too. I mean, if you want to look at it like a little more, you know, not even looking at the character scaling, these two quite literally have no way to hit Datara. Once he's in the air, that's it. It's over. He's, like you said, he's just gonna drop bombs. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing they can do at any capacity. So Datara should clear this one pretty. I don't want to say low diff, but again, it's not like they're gonna be able to just slam him down. Honestly, like there's nothing they can do. So Datara gets this one. And this group is, you know, really 3 people, so I can't really do too much about that. That's just kind of the way it runs. Group 3 is the third Raikage, Gengetsu, Lord Mu, and Rasa. We actually have a Kage versus Edo Gokage video. Check that out if you want like in-depth scaling on a bunch of that. You're on there. But this one's kind of interesting. Let's start with Rasa, since he's pretty objectively the weak link of the group. What's your opinion on Rasa, bro?
Okay, so listen, Rasa is not near as strong as what people like to say. Many people, when they think about Rasa, and this is another thing that also goes for the third Kazekage as well with Sasori, is they think that Rasa scales toward Gaara. Which the reason why this is wrong, like completely, is we know that whenever they clash, Gaara is merely holding his sand in the air until the Alliance could get over the hill to fight the Kage, right? But we know that as soon as they do, he just grabs the sand and throws it down. And it's also noted that Rasa's sand is different than Gaara's, and the fact that it has gold imbued in it, giving it a higher mass and more force. It's similar to the iron sand, right, with Magna Release. So it having a higher mass is really important, because this means that for Gaara's sand to overwhelm it, and Rasa's having a higher mass, which is a higher assertion in a force equation, then that means Gaara's sand would have a far exceeding advantage in acceleration. So it should also be far faster. So like the route that people like to go with Gaara and say he's like, you know, above, you know, Raikage and stuff with his sand and speed does not work for Rasa.
Yeah.
So Rasa really does like suck, and like he doesn't even like stand out amongst the Kage. It's not like he's like Mu, who, you know, we can get to in a minute, who has like way better feats. Like Rasa's really not like that extraordinary other than that little.
I want to add to that too, because what people don't bring up is that the sand in Gaara's gourd is faster than the sand he uses like in the ground, like the large quantities. So this isn't even necessarily the special sand that's being used. Like in the Datara fight, that Datara notes, like the sand in Gaara's gourd is like much faster and much more threatening than the large Shikaku arms that are going after him and whatnot. So even looking at it like that, Gaara has access to faster sand. He's just not using it because he has to combat a larger quantity of sand. So I 1000% agree. I think people overblow the Rasa thing. Rasa just isn't that impressive. Hate to break it to you. Shitty father, shitty character. Damn! No, I'm playing this bad.
Not cut that.
Yo. Anyway, point is, so Rasa isn't too threatening. We even see like the other Kage do have countermeasures to the sand that can be used. It's like trap them and whatnot, so it's not really that much of an issue as well. This is a little cool to think about. Third Raikage is also pretty interesting. I mean, he's basically the fourth plus like Hell Stab. Nothing really to add to that, just maybe arguably better durability, maybe relative speed. Regardless of all of this, it doesn't make too much of a difference in this encounter because aside from Rasa, he's not going to get the opportunity to really tag Lord Mu or Gengetsu with either of these. Gengetsu's going to be using, if we give like a hypothetical Gengetsu, like a better version of him than Kabuto used, and let's say he uses the Steam Imp in conjunction with his Mirage Genjutsu, which he can do, then I mean the third's just going to be fighting Mirages and get like Steam Imps blowing up on him and stuff like that, which is going to be a ginormous issue for him. And even if you didn't argue that, I mean, the fact that he'll never fight the Clam just means like he'll just end up getting taken out. And even if you don't argue, right, that the Steam Imps have like the AP to breach his durability, it doesn't matter because Lord Mu is such an animal. In this, talk about Mu, bro. The goat, bro.
Mu is an animal. Now, but before I like talk about Mu, I just want to say that I've heard the argument that shonen logic works for third Raikage being the strongest of these Kage since he's the last one defeated, and this is just stupid. Naruto's not like that. It's not linear and like monkey brain, so that just doesn't work. And Lord Mu is most definitely the strongest and fastest here.
And the last one who was alive. Unironically was the last one alive.
Yeah, exactly.
All I'm saying.
He was alive. He was like, he got like messed up and he's like, all right, I guess I'm just gonna go.
I'm gonna fission.
He just left.
I'm a fission. I'm still here. What up? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Nah, but Lord Mu, like we were talking about like outstanding feats, and we were talking about Rasa and stuff. Whenever the sand or the hands come out of the sand in like their first encounter, Mu's the only one that really reacts. He does the best against the ceiling. He has particle style and he battles Inoki. And a lot of people, especially myself, tend to believe that Inoki is the strongest of the 5 Kage. I personally do subscribe to it, or at least he's like top 2 for sure. But Mu here, his sensory and stuff, it allows him to dodge KCM1 Naruto. It kind of gives him a really heightened advantage in speed because he can precog almost everything. And again, we already see him outreacting the third Raikage, Gengetsu, Rasa, all 3 of these guys pretty easily, to be honest. Like, he doesn't really show like he's like struggling or whatnot. So I think that Mu is clearly above these guys. And with his particle style arguably being the best ability here, I don't care. The third Raikage ain't that crazy.
Slams.
The particle style just snaps him away just like that.
It's also implied his particle style is faster than the QB Naruto clone that was keeping up with the third as well.
Yep.
I'm arguably performing better. Dudes don't want to hear that, but he did, you know what I'm saying? He was pulling up. He did run on his back. You know, maybe you could argue the Raikage had some issues landing and that might have impacted it, but he does believe that with his like particle style speed based on him like precog sensing Naruto and dodging him, that it would be faster. So if you also go off that idea, particle style's attack speed just cracked in this situation.
I was just gonna say that like Rasa's like his sand having a greater mass has no like importance or relevance because particle style, boom. Take a particle style, the Clam, boom.
He gets sensitive too.
The third Raikage, boom, and he also senses it. He counters all these guys. The third Raikage, let's look back at what beat him. Oh, that's right, precog. Precog beat him in precision, and this guy's faster than KCM1 and has way better sensory. he's just slamming all these
Yeah,
moves. You know what I mean?
yeah.
That's you go ahead.
So
go ahead.
something I want
that
to
was
add
fun.
too is that the reason we said Lord Mu is also our highlight pick is because in character, or at least as an Edo, he does kind of just null his chakra signature and then try and snake dudes with particle style, which is kind of crack. So even if you argue like Gengetsu or Raikage are like preoccupy one or the other, he could just snake the other and just like go invisible again with no real ability to sense him. So I mean, the fact that he was still around, like people don't bring this up. Naruto went into Sage mode and never sensed Mu. Like that's crazy. That's crazy. He never caught that up. The same Naruto who could sense the entirety of the war vividly. I mean, sure it's a shadow clone, but I still think that is pretty insane. Like the ability, and that is something like for Boruto stuff, the Otsutsuki do share. And like
and even then we know the clones can build the senjutsu because that's what they did in the Brain Arc too to get him that sensory. So keep going. I was
it's
just
cracked. No, it's insane. So I definitely agree. The main issue is just when you run into Gengetsu and Mu taking each other out. My theory on this is that the only way this works out in Gengetsu's favor, because nothing in their arsenals would ever point to Gengetsu actually beating Mu. Yeah, like his team ups are fast. Don't get me wrong, but like he's pretty cool. But I will say the only way we're talking about this is that my theory is that Fissured Mu had to have fought weakened Gengetsu. Those are the only forms where you could make their argument they're relative, because that's the only form where like Mu can't use particle style. So it just wouldn't really make any other sense otherwise, because his steam imps should not be faster, as Gaara's reacting to them consistently. They are fast though, but they not that fast. And otherwise, the clam can be sensed by Mu. So it just presents a weird things, but that's my theory on Mu versus Gengetsu. I'm under that interpretation. So more often than not, due to Mu just kind of being like this Batman-esque shadowy figure who's just going to take you out when you're not looking, it just seems more likely that he'd come out on top. Just because, you know, he's not really going to play by the rules. He has all these great showings, all this stuff. So, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Next up, we have Kinkaku, Ginkaku, Dan, Asuma, Hizashi Hyuga, and Kakuzu with 4 hearts. Now, do you want to lead with this? Let's start off with Kinkaku and Ginkaku, right? Because we can imply that these two actually may work together, due to, you know, which may present some issues. But when the question of like which one is stronger comes about, you have some interesting perspective. I want you to talk about this.
Yeah, so I think when it comes about who's stronger, I think it's actually clearly Kinkaku with a K. I think Kinkaku just displays way better feats in the war. He does better against Darui in almost every single instance, and against all their ninjutsu for the entire alliance. And then even once Genkaku gets in trouble, he's like, Kinkaku, help me, and he actually gets like really scared. And then we get more implications too, like this is like not like a one-time thing. So pretty much whenever Genkaku goes raged, Kakuzu pretty much states that like this only happens when Genkaku hits the bucket. So this means that he did die before Kinkaku. So we do know this, and I have my opinions on like how I think the Tobirama encounters went, all that, you know, all that stuff, how they died, whatnot. Now I'm not gonna go into that here, but pretty much it should be implied that at the first encounter, Tobirama probably killed Ginkaku, since Ginkaku thinks that Tobirama is the one that brought them back. So, you know, and I'm pretty sure Kinkaku also, I don't know if, I think it's Kinkaku that notes that they have the mark of the third. So that means they probably did kill, that they're both aware that they killed the second Raikage, and that they should know what the third Raikage is. But Kinkaku probably lived longer to see like his reign as Kage, and Ginkaku died first. So I think there's definitely a precedent set that Ginkaku will die before Kinkaku. I mean, I think they would work together, but I think if it came down to picking a winner, kind of like the first group we had with Haku, I don't think it'd be very fair to say that like Kinkaku being like the bigger brother, like letting Ginkaku win would be kind of like, okay, I think we just gotta give it to Kinkaku.
Yeah.
No, do you want to talk about the next part?
Yeah, I want to mention something too. I also real quick also favor Kinkaku's weapons more than Ginkaku's. I think Ginkaku's require more of a setup. Whereas, you know, Kinkaku has the Basho Sen, which when used by Tenten has extremely potent nature releases that were one-shotting Kakuzu's heart. So, I mean, it's pretty insane. And granted, Ginkaku's win con could you make a case it does work on Kinkaku if he does get his word, but it does require a bit of setup. Like, it's not instant. They do have to engage for a period of time. So, you could argue if, like, they're relative, that might also happen. We're just arguing that, like, Kinkaku has, like, more implications to say, like, he is superior.
And Kinkaku knows it, yeah. And Kinkaku, like, knows that technique. And he's also, like, a smart guy, too. Like, real quick.
Yeah, no, you're spitting, go.
Yeah. Like, whenever he goes in, like, his transform state, it's really impressive. He's able to have, like, cognitive thought, of think about tactical plans and stuff. So, yeah. In a six-tail state, no, like, That's a little off. So I mean, let's be honest. Six Tails Genkaku does slam Genkaku like easy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think like him being able to at least think of some tactical way of not to say a word a bajillion times to get trapped, I think is pretty obvious.
Yeah. Because there are
keep going.
There are ways to counter that specific ninja tool. I agree. And then you also have some interesting fighters like Dan. Now Dan's kind of cool because Dan's pretty crazy in his ability. He can essentially soul swap. It's like almost a tier up from what the Yamanaka clan can do with like swapping, pretty much taking over someone's mind and stuff like that, because that can be resisted. You can break out of that. But Dan can straight up soul swap with either Kinkaku or Ginkaku if one decides to rampage in V2. And we do see, at least for a short period after getting comboed up, Kinkaku was susceptible to it by Ino. Granted, that was after like a flurry of attacks, so I don't want to say like she's just gonna do that, but the fact that he does have that might imply that Dan also might be able to do that. In which case, if you say like Kinkaku beats Ginkaku and Dan takes over his body, he's just in a version 2 six-tail state, just beating everybody up, which is pretty crazy. Now, granted, he probably wouldn't be able to use that body to the same finesse as Kinkaku, but I do think it is interesting to note that he could potentially swap with one or the other. We also see that he's able to swap with Tsunade and move her body, dodging one of Madara's attacks, even when she's unconscious, because she's like losing consciousness. He enters her body, reacts to Madara's attack mid-air, like she's literally falling in the air, and then he dodges it. I believe she gets grazed by it, but at the end of the day, that's still a pretty impressive feat at that point. So he actually does have some pretty nutty win cons with this soul swap. There's definitely some potential for it. Do you want to add to Dan? Like, I think he's pretty cool in this scenario.
I mean, yeah, like you could argue that he like outspeeds Madara's attacks,
Yeah,
like with Tsunade and stuff, which is crazy. Like, no, like if you subscribe to him being above Madara in speed, then please like say he wins this section.
Yeah.
But he is pretty crazy, but I mean, let's be honest, those are like kind of more inconsistent. We know he just died to random Jonin and stuff, so I don't think he's like around here boasting Madara level speed and stuff. So, like, and but he's weakened too. Like, no way.
And Madara is always
no
like
way,
suppressed versus the 5 Kage. He's always sandbagging, like probably didn't care at that point. Like, so it's just to say Dan is that speed is unbelievably inconsistent. But I will say this is the same dude who was not being sealed. He was in a barrier, so I do think he does warrant some conversation. After that, I mean, we have Asuma. And I mean, Asuma's just not relevant in this discussion. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Like, he just has nothing in his arsenal. Like, not his wind style, not his chakra blades. None of it matters. I hate to break it to you. If you want to say Asuma beats version 2 Kinkaku or Ginkaku, by all means. I just, you got that, though. After that, we have Hisashi and Hisashi, which is, I mean, Hisashi's weird because he's only shown relative to Hiyashi. Which is like, okay, then it's like, who does Hiyashi scale to? And you brought this up to me. It's kind of like a little bit circular because they just kind of scale off each other and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I completely agree. It's really circular. It reminds me of when people talk about Jonin Minato and Jonin Raikage. Yeah. They're just scaled to each other, and it's like, well, who they scale to? It's like, well, the other guy. And it's like, okay, what's that do? It's like nothing. But we know that, like, they're not even that crazy. Like, they seem, like, extremely shocked in the exams, like Hiyashi. He seems like really shocked that like Neji's capable of using all these attacks. Like it's stated, I think, on two different it's stated like 2 different occasions that Neji's the greatest genius in the entire history. Neji should also have a better Byakugan than them, to be honest. His just shows a lot better feats. And we know that they're like either their Byakugan is like not even the top of the clan. Since like we know that a guy named Takuma Hyuga has the sharpest Byakugan in the world, and that's just stated like in the war at this time. So like their Byakugan's not that crazy. You could imply that Neji's like on that level. You could say that Neji is like above that what's it called, the Kumogakure like shadow leader or whatever it was, and they're like Kage level, and we're above these guys, the guys that actually like assassinated Hisashi. So you could argue that maybe Neji's like above them through that as well. Like even as a kid, like I don't really think they're that impressive, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah, they just don't. They're weirder to talk about, honestly. Like they just don't showcase the feats. They're also just. It's not like Hiyashi's just like objectively better than like Neji or Hinata when they're like repelling the Ten Tails attacks either. It's not like he's showcasing that he's that much better than them either. So I wouldn't even necessarily make the leap to say like he's in a whole other tier compared to Neji. But granted, it is a bit debatable. But I'm not of the opinion that they're on the level of version 2 Ginkaku or Ginkaku. I think that's the bottom line. Like there's nothing to suggest they'd be that strong. Hisashi's taken out off screen in the manga, and granted he doesn't have any anti-feats. he also doesn't have any feats to use, so it's kind of like tough, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't help the only guy he fought. Doesn't really do anything either. So it's a little tougher in that case, but regardless, even if you did say he was on that level, it's not like he's going to block the Tenketsu of Ginkaku, or even if he did in base, they could just force them back open with the Kyuubi's chakra like Naruto did to a similar degree. So it's not even as if like his arsenal really gives him like this overwhelming advantage in this case. Then we also have Kakuzu. I mean, and we talked about like Kinkaku versus Kakuzu's hearts and stuff like that. What you think about Kakuzu in this situation, bro? What you feeling about him?
10-10. That's it, just 10-10.
Yeah.
One-shotting Kakuzu's heart.
Yeah.
It's like all four. He gets sliced down by Jonin and stuff. Like, come on now, Kakuzu's not beating Kinkaku or Genkaku.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's be honest here. Maybe Asuma, maybe Hisashi, but he's not beating the top ones.
Yeah.
If you go with that, even like a normal or higher interpretation for Don, I think he also beats him, to be real.
Yeah.
Because like Kakuzu, he's not that crazy. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
here,
yeah. In this situation,
I mean, that's it. You go ahead.
Yeah,
You got anything else?
No, I agree. Honestly, I think like Kinkaku is definitely the star pick. Kinkaku, you could probably make a case for, but at the end of the day, they're pretty much like the same fighter with some minor differences. But like that's the whole deal with them. Like if you want to pick one or the other, obviously by all means, we just think one of the two should be them. Dan probably has the most interesting case out of all of these. But again, like the soul swap. It's also not as if like if one of the brothers is not taken down, which they wouldn't be because they're probably going to team up until like they get rid of everybody else and then fight amongst each other. Even if he takes over one of their bodies, he's not really going to be able to beat the other one because he's not going to be able to use their abilities as well as the other one. So there just really shouldn't be too much to that. So we think Kinkaku is definitely going to be the winner in this one, but there is some interesting areas to this discussion. Next up, we have Hanzo, Kimmimaro, Granny Chiyo, and Chūkichi. Now I'm going to start off with Chūkichi. If you don't know who he is, that's probably a good sign that he's not winning this because he's strictly a sensory shinobi that was originally in Datara's unit and then retreated or was brought back. So he also doesn't have like any offensive showings, like none. So he's not winning. We could just, cross him off the list. Yeah. He's not winning. Starting off, we could talk about Hanzo. Hanzo, I mean, unfortunately, this is the more nerfed version of Hanzo, the one that lost his ninja way, has gone rusty. Isn't fighting. He's like snaking people around in the ninja world and stuff like that. He's got all these like issues with him. So he's obviously not going to have all the, he'll take part in the overwhelming lore advantages he has, but he's obviously not going to be the most like as he could be. We also have Kimmimaro, who's pretty interesting. Reacts to KCM1 Naruto's Rasen Shuriken in the anime. In the manga, it's not shown, but the most interesting thing about Kimmimaro is that he's still alive after Naruto arrives to the battlefield and is only taken out when he's getting sealed, like via the Edo Tensei ending. So that's also interesting. Granny Chiyo is also in a similar boat. She kind of goes out that same way. She does use random shinobi in this case, so we'll give her random shinobi as a puppet, maybe a couple. But, this is also not even Prime Chiyo, who has some, relativity to Hanzo potentially. You have a good stance on this. You're going to talk about it in a second. But let's start off with Granny Chiyo. Let's start off with the old lady. What do you want to address the biggest one that she's like relative to Hanzo?
Every statement that talks about Hanzo and Chiyo like fighting does not mention them fighting. It mentions Chiyo fighting in the Second Great War, but it's more or less she's working as a medic ninja to heal Hanzo's poisons and the soldiers that actually were hit and the shinobi that were hit with the poison, not like actually running around using puppets to beat up Hanzo. It's more or less that's when she's concocting the poison. That's when you could argue like some people like to say that she also has like some Sanin rivalry to like Tsunade being a medic, but this is kind of that like medic part where she's showing off Hanzo's like poison, how she can counter that. So it's more or less she's just like a medic on that field, not like actually fighting Hanzo, because Hanzo's skills way higher than her, and it'd be really weird if she was in her prime. What do you think?
I mean, if you want to go off the Prime Chiyo, I think there also is a layer of this to where like if you interpret Sasuru's speed a certain way, and like Granny Chiyo's feats off them, maybe, but even then, right, I wouldn't even give that above anything Hanzo's lore, because that's more so like implied to be above like the third Kazekage and stuff like that. And by the way, for those who like, because there's like a statement for like the third Kazekage being the strongest, That's more than likely in reference to the Sand Village, not the Ninja World, because there's just no way that that's really supported around that time. You have players with Minato like around and stuff like that, or even further back. More prime heroes in, more Tobirama or Hashirama just doesn't work at all. So that obviously is not going to be the case. I would also add to the problem with these two against Hanzo is that Hanzo's poison is such an issue for them. They were actually made to avoid it as Edo Tensei. Hanzo in character just nukes the battlefield in poison. And with on top of Ibuse, and then just runs in and starts claiming dudes, like just starts running at them, like chopping them up and stuff like that. So if you imply he does do a similar thing here, the Edo should be affected by it. It's gonna present a pretty big issue for them. What's your thoughts on this?
I think Hanzo, like, I think the poison does give everybody a really big issue. I think it's one of the best abilities on this entire list, maybe other than like 1 or 2, and we can get to that later, but. The poison just presents something that almost nobody has a counter to. And like even then, this is a Hanzo that lost his resolve. So if someone were to like talk to him like Mifune, and he were to stab his sack or
anyway.
to stab his immune system, then maybe you could argue that it would also just like bomb the battlefield again. But the poison does counter absolutely everybody. Some people even subscribe to like Hanzo's poison being above Sorcery's, who's like considered to be like the top of the poison world, I guess. Which I do subscribe to. I also subscribe to the idea that like Hanzo in his prime, like physically, is above the Sannin, like especially when they're older. Yeah. Because some people say that like, oh, that's like a young, more like Jonin-esque Sannin, but we know that like Tsunade in part 1 when she's fighting Kabuto, she states that like he's like has skills like exceeding even her in her prime, which is like not obviously this isn't like physical stats or nothing, but this is obviously means that her prime is not part 1 and it's not part 2 either.
Yeah.
So that means it's sometime before that, according to like what she's thinking. So more than likely it's when they were in the Second War. That's when they gained the reputation, and they gained the reputation not from beating Hanzo or nothing, but literally just surviving a fight with Hanzo the Salamander, which says a lot.
He decreed them that. So, like that was a feat for them, just surviving. He's like, all right, y'all are valid.
Exactly. He's like, yeah, y'all can have this Sannin, I guess. Yeah. But like even then, like another thing to note is like if you think Jiraiya, like when Jiraiya goes to visit Pain, he's talking, he's interrogating the guy, and pretty much he's like, wait, this guy beat Hanzo? Are you kidding me? Hanzo's dead? And then he's like actually sweating, his pupils are dilating and stuff. He's getting like really scared of this. So I think Hanzo being above that Sannin tier in his prime, like physically, is definitely a possibility. Now I don't think that prime Hanzo is really going to come out here. I don't think he's going to be like, you know what, I am going to conquer the world, and he's just going to go back to being like that. So because Mifune calls him like a dull blade, that's kind of what he compares him to in the war, implying that like Hanzo was trying to conquer the world and just lost his ninja way. Yeah. Which is really important in Naruto and whatnot. Yeah. But what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Hanzo's definitely impressive at this point. I definitely agree. Like
a top
hot. He's definitely, the nerf on him cannot be overstated as well. There is a lot to that. And I will say in this situation, I do think he's still going to be the top dog. I will also add too that he does fight with Ibuse in character as well. Like all the statements made about Hanzo's strength show him on his salamander. So it seems very consistent. Even anime stuff show, like for example, people don't know like Hanzo's body flicker is also really impressive. He's body flickering away from Nagato's soul dragon in the anime. He's like body flickering with his salamander, like while he's on it. So there's a lot you could actually argue. Like he body flickers in, like shoots poison at the ground, nukes the area in it, and it's gonna present a big issue. Kimmimaro, I wish I could give more in here. But the fact that he's a close-range fighter kind of means that, like, in order to get close to Hanzo, he's going to be forced to fight Hanzo while this salamander is going down. And the poison is just going to paralyze them. And that's going to instant GG for Hanzo because they're just going to get sealed, obviously, or they'll just be defeated at that point. And nothing in Kimmimaro's arsenal would necessarily suggest he would have, like, that poison resistance unless you maybe go off Sasuke. But I would argue Sasuke is, like, completely an outlier in terms of that. So there's just nothing to really suggest that. Even though Kimmimaro is pretty impressive from a stat perspective, it shouldn't just put him like objectively above Hanzo. Or if he did, like you'd have to argue like he one-shots Hanzo before like the poison starts, which Hanzo, before he even like land, like that's literally how he starts the fight, which is just gonna present a big issue, especially depending on who goes for Hanzo. So, you know, more often than not, Hanzo's poison just really gives him an edge here, just due to like how he's just gonna be able to cover the entire battlefield. Nobody really has any range or anything like that. It's just gonna present some giant issues. So we kind of lean towards Hanzo. Do you have any closing thoughts for this one?
No, I think Hanzo is, like, in my opinion, I think he's definitely the winner for sure. I think he's the clear winner. Yeah, that's about it. Yeah.
The next group we have, this is the last group, by the way, guys, before we go on to the round 2 with the winners. This is the Edo Jinchuriki. Now, I want to say this is probably one of the only groups where you could pretty much say anybody and it would probably be valid. Due to the fact that so we'll be like using the Amp Jinchuriki. And essentially, all the Amp Jinchuriki have pretty much made to where they're like perfect Bijou. They're able to do the partial transformation. They're also noted to have their movements be distinctly different. On top of, they're all able to compete with QB Naruto and B. All of their attacks, you know, the potency is also pretty impressive, as they're able to consistently damage Naruto and invoke like owls from him. And like, you know, he's taking damage even through his QB cloak. So there's a bunch of issues with these fighters. So this is one of the ones where you could say like, okay, the arsenal probably could just go depending on who you think. We have some interpretations on this. Starting off with this, right? Assuming these guys all start in base, who's your like number 1 pick? Like, who do you kind of like think is probably the most like threatening on paper?
I think the most threatening on paper is Han. I think Han has the most impressive feat out of all of them. Absolutely just blitzing KCM1 the hardest out of all of them. And there is a third data book statement that says the power and speed of his taijutsu is the best in the entire world. Which, now, the translation does differ from source to source, but it's still a crazy statement. You could argue it's like above Guy and whatnot, which says a lot. But what Hanzo, like, like him kicking Naruto isn't like the craziest thing about him. The craziest thing about him is Boil Release. And Boil Release is like one of the craziest amps in the entire series. It has some crazy statements in the data book. Like when Naruto fights Kaguya, he goes from like being completely under her, getting overpowered, to using Boil Release and then overpowering Kaguya Otsutsuki. Are you kidding me? He's literally overpowering her and stuff. This is a Kaguya who's like blitzing Chidori, Rinnegan, Sasuke, and stuff like that. And like the Boil Release is putting him above that level, which says a lot about how much that can kind of amp Han. I think since he's obviously had this Bijou for a lot longer than Naruto did, obviously. And has a closer connection as well. So
I agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
I love what you're saying. And the reason we're saying this is because Boil Release will like kind of provide a distinct like stat edge compared to all these other guys who like even though they're getting amped, it's not like their innate abilities like amp them to that degree, which is I think what you're getting at. Which is I 100%.
It's like
agree.
Ability amps. Yeah, this is like a physical amp that's actually gonna like. If you say they're all equal and they're all relative, then this just makes him above all of them. Like
I will also add too that there are some other impressive Edo Jinchuriki, like Yagura. Yagura is pretty cracked. We personally, I'll just say this right now, Yagura and Han are our top 2 picks. Yagura is also pretty insane. He has the Aqua Mirror, which is completely like created a mirage or like complete clone of like the individual through the mirror and just equal out with them, no matter like how strong they are. We haven't seen a finite limit, but the fact that it does work on QB Naruto and B is pretty impressive. And I will also add too, though, more crazy for Yagura is his Coral Jutsu, because this actually completely restrains QB Naruto to the point that Guy had to like break him out of it. So it actually like it pretty much made him stuck in B's hand. He almost got comboed by Obito due to it. So this is actually valid when you consider the fact that he could go around just slapping people and they just like pretty much trap them in coral that they'd be unable to escape from and stuff like that. So he definitely has like one of the better arsenals compared to them. Do you want to add on Yagura?
No, I don't. I mean, maybe someone could say that Roshi could like burn through it, but other than that, I don't think Yu-Gi-Oh has a counter. You can maybe argue that Han doesn't have a counter. Utakata doesn't have one. Fu doesn't have one. You know, I just think it's kind of cracked. His abilities are really what sets him also above. So if you're gonna take like a physical standpoint, I think Han's the best choice. And if you're taking an ability standpoint, I think Yagura is the best choice.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way of putting it. And you could also argue like, okay, what if these guys all level up in their Bijou forms? What happens there? The Bijou like hierarchy is not as like simple as it may seem. Like, you know, 1 through 9. It's really weird. The 8 Tails actually like chastises the 9 Tails for thinking this way. This kind of differs for some translations, but we'll just say like for now, like okay. And the reason we say this is like, for example, the One Tails has some of the best Bijou feats, despite it being the weakest Bijou. On top of this, all of these tail beasts are able to damage the 8 Tails hide, capable of tanking its own Bijou bomb. So it's like they all do show some level of relativity to one another and are able to damage a higher tail beast. In my opinion, the question of like the tails only comes about if they're like charging a tail beast bomb at one another. That's when, okay, maybe the chakra difference can be argued.
Yeah.
But if you're like arguing this like a kaiju Bijou like brawl, they should all be able to damage one another. You know what I'm saying? Like it shouldn't really be that much of an issue for them. Do you want to add to that? Like I think that's kind of the best way to put it.
No, I completely agree. I think it's definitely misrepresented in the community. I think you were.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to go off that, you could maybe say Fu. If you want to, like, argue they go into this route and, like, charge up and, like, do that. But we'll just, so maybe you say Fu. We think, like, we'll just stick with Han and Yagura since in this last phase, the Bijou all do the same thing anyway, so it doesn't actually inherently matter too much. We just kind of favor these two ability-wise and for the reasons we listed before. But I just do want to note pretty explicitly that the Bijou discussion is a pretty separate discussion from their, like, base forms. I just want to make that very clear. That's, like, kind of its own thing.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So, in the winner's round, we have, like, Han and Yagura, as we mentioned, Haku or Mengetsu, Hanzo, Deidara, Kinkaku, and Lord Mu. These are like the winners of each free-for-all, in which case there is a lot to discuss here. This is a weird one. I'll start off by saying that there are there's a lot of distinct advantages for fighters like Deidara, Haku, and Mu who are able to go airborne and just play a ranged game because they're not going to be affected by Hanzo's large-scale poison on the ground, which was presenting some issues. So there is something to that. What do you think about this fight? Like, add to that, like, aerial bit real quick.
Yeah, so I think Mu, I think the precedent set for him is actually, he kind of guarantees a one-on-one, and what do I mean by that? I think that, to be honest, I think he's just going to go invisible and go hide. Like, I actually think he's just going to go fly somewhere and go hide, and then just wait for one person. So, like, you could low-key just take him out of the equation for now, which, to be honest, I think that gives Deidara a really stupid advantage. Like, again, I don't subscribe to Deidara actually being insane. And, like, combat speed-wise, I guess I can get into this here as well. But combat speed, Deidara does not scale to heavy Sasuke like some people think. Man. He's actually not that crazy. But, yeah, so, like, pretty much, Deidara knows this himself. Like, whenever the encounter first happens, Sasuke is from an extremely, like, substantial distance. And then he charges at Deidara. Deidara then reacts last second and goes onto the tree behind him. And then, so, honestly, you could argue that this is actually a speed feat for Sasuke blitzing Deidara, since Deidara is only shown reacting in that last second. Therefore, if the distance was, closer, say, then that Deidara would not have been able to react. Then we see that Sasuke charges him again, and Deidara cannot react. He cannot do anything except shoot a bomb out of his right hand, in which literally he has to explode himself, and he literally states that he barely managed to escape hidden in the bomb blast.
Yeah.
Then Sasuke's from an even more, like, substantial distance, and Deidara instantly says, okay, I'm no longer going to contest Sasuke. I'm just going to go out of his 5-meter attack range with C2. And even then, Sasuke only gets hit by that bomb as well, because he didn't know about the tracking effect as well, which will come into handy as well here. Again, it's just like, the explosion velocities of Deidara can scale to heavy Sasuke, but anything else like combat speed, reaction speed, travel speed.
I agree. No, it's made pretty explicit that like he's faster in the air as well with his bird summonings. Like he's more comparable to Onoki. I will say you could argue Onoki's suppressed in that situation. Just to lure Deidara higher up away from the island, but for the sake, I'll just give it to him because he does know Onoki's faster as well than his prime. So Deidara in the air is definitely where you want to be talking about him. Otherwise, he just like is not as impressive on the ground. And that definitely will aid him in this discussion. Haku, you could also make some arguments like Haku pops up an ice mirror behind Deidara and like tries to senbon him in a similar capacity to Sai, which is something. But the issue is, I will say, like, this is kind of like an issue we were talking about with like Han, Yagura, essentially Kinkaku, is that if they do decide to start nuking the area with Bijou bombs, it's kind of it, man. Like, no one's really going to be able to stop them. There's not too much they can do. This is probably more relevant in the case of Han or Yagura. And we'll talk about, like, how maybe this goes to Deidara as well. But, like, it's a little less clear if Ginkaku could do a Bijou bomb. I'm under the interpretation he could. A lot of the anime stuff supports it, but hey, man, if you don't want to say so, like that's fine. Just because I know some people.
I think
yeah. I'm under that. I subscribe to that. So that could be something. I will also add too that Data reverse the Bijus is kind of interesting based on his showing with the three tails. I actually have a take on this that I want to bring up to you, but I want to hear your talk about this first. I'm gonna throw in my bit after.
Yeah. So I mean, Yagura is literally in this matchup, and now, before we get into Yagura and why like Datara might just be above, it kind of depends on it, like how you interpret the statement of like Biju are stronger with a Jinchuriki. And now I've always interpreted this to be like in the way that they know how to use their abilities better because they're kind of just stupid when they're beasts. Now obviously Kurama is definitely an exception to this, just him being like super smart. Something, he could be like above Kakashi level IQ. But generally, Isobu, which is the three tails, was kind of just roaming down in the ocean. And then Datara came up. So I don't think like his actual physical durability or anything like that was actually like lower, but I just think he didn't know how to use his abilities. But I do think he was underwater more than likely when he was hit, and it's implied he was hit by a C3, which could have dampened the blast as well. And the C3 is stated in the third data book to be the most powerful of all explosions and whatnot. So you could say that like there's a case that Datara could just bomb Yagura like that. Which is really important for Datara's side.
Something I was gonna add too, because this goes in line with what you're saying. We actually see Isobu when he's fighting B. When he's fighting B, and this is something I was gonna bring up to you. He actually like kind of pulls up in a ball and like uses his outermost shell like as like he starts rolling around it's like one of those when Beyblades went to Bay wheels and they started spinning. He does something like that, right? He's just going around. And I was actually gonna bring this up. It also could be possible that outer layer is more durable than like the soft stomach that he was kind of exhibiting versus Datara, and that might also be like why Jinchuriki would make him stronger, because he'd be able to use that more effectively in combat. So that's how he was fighting. So that also is an interpretation for like maybe potentially three tails scaling above the likes of the C3. But generally, like you could make a case that Datara's explosions would be very effective in this case, assuming he does not just get nuked out of the sky, which is also just like equally as probable.
Yeah, they shoot the Bijou bomb at him and he's like, what?
Yeah. There's not too much you can do in this situation with that. I will also say too, C4 is effective on everybody here. So that could potentially be a win condition for this. Gengetsu's just not relevant. I hate to say it. If he makes it past this phase, he's just not nearly as relevant as Haku is. None of the 7 Ninja Swordsman's tools are really going to aid him at all in this situation. Even like his hydrification doesn't matter because we already saw what happened when Suigetsu was exposed to Bijou bombs. So we see those like high quantities of chakra like based attacks can actually get to a point where it just like negates or overloads the hydrification and stuff like that. So it's definitely not absolute, I will say. So there is something to that. Kinkaku is also weird because he's more so relevant with his version 2 state as well, which we previously discussed. So that's definitely an issue. I will say though, Hanzo, there's a couple different scenarios we'll see. If you're gonna argue for Hanzo, you kind of have to imply that he catches like Kinkaku in base, Han and Yagura in base for him to paralyze them. Haku, you could probably make a decent case, actually gets away because he'll just be able to reflect through an ice mirror and go somewhere else completely. But that's probably the best way you go around arguing that the Bijou don't just straight up nuke everybody and go off a win condition via that route. Otherwise, that kind of goes down. And if that doesn't go down, you kind of have a little bit of some interesting matchups like Hanzo versus Haku, which could be kind of interesting. I think there is something to that. But at the end of the day, right, the thing we're getting at is either the Bijou and Kinkaku are the last ones, or it's kind of like Haku and Hanzo are the last ones. In which case, Datara is obviously not really going to be able to do anything against Haku, maybe potentially being behind him. Or Datara just wins by nuking them. There's so much that can happen here. But the bottom line that we want to make clear is that Moo's just going to be plotting while all of this is happening. And whether it's a Bijou or Haku or Hanzo, he's just going to snake them with particle style in character the second any of this wraps up, assuming that a Bijou bomb doesn't accidentally land in a direction where he's like stationed off and like kind of chilling around like invisible.
He should still be able to sense the chakra,
exactly.
Since how like fast it is.
Exactly. Yeah. So that presents a big issue. Is there anything? So Moo's the big issue here. He just kind of has the ability to kind of navigate away from all of these individuals' hacks. So how the fight progresses doesn't even inherently matter. Like you can argue, it's pretty much like, okay, how does this mini free-for-all go? And then like, is anybody here beating Moo with particle style and his ability to null?
Well, and real quick to add to that, with like, if you think the 3 that come down before him is Datara, Hanzo, and Haku, I think the only way you could really argue Datara really comes out here is that if Hanzo and Haku are fighting, because otherwise we know the C3 has droppings, and obviously the C2, they all have travel for like where the bomb has to fall and whatnot. And then Hanzo, again, you alluded to this earlier, he's a master of body flicker, and Haku could always just teleport through the mirrors, so they all kind of counter those travels, so they kind of have to be fighting for Datara to like actually win and like third party that fight, I guess. So I think Datara does lose here, but yeah, I do think Mu, honestly, I do think he beats both of them, because one thing you also have to note is that the particle style literally destroys everything. So if there is a poison cloud and particle style goes off, it would actually just like erase the poison.
It completely.
Yeah, it would just completely atomize the poison. So that's one thing to note. So you could argue he definitely counters that, and it does take Hanzo a full 5 minutes to get a new batch, or to hit the salamander to get a new batch. And even then, you could also argue that Mu would just be able to sense.
Oh, it like shoots him underground, like with the particle style. Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah, he could sense it. Yeah. So Hanzo, like, obviously we were kind of hyping him up earlier, but unfortunately he is nerfed, and he does kind of get countered, but it's almost just because how nasty Mu is as well. And one thing to know, but you can go ahead right after this. I agree. But like Haku with the mirror, one thing is, Mu's precog is insane. So I actually think if Haku got behind him with a mirror, I think Mu would just know it. Like, I actually think he would turn around before.
It would definitely be an interesting. I agree with that. It's definitely like a bit interesting situation. And you have a bunch of variables too, with like Mu being able to particle style any of Haku's mirrors. Obviously Mangetsu, even if we chose him, just gets negged by particle style. Stop it. Even the full Bijou, just aren't immune to it, just due to the properties of particle style. It would just like say like, oh, how does that really work? It would just like revert them to like their human forms, and then like they would just, Mu would win via that front. So there really wouldn't be too much there. And even Datara, who like at best caps out at Onoki, who Mu just like obviously like outlasted, on par with, arguably superior due to his arsenal. At least I think so. But maybe you could argue for Onoki. But yeah, like there's a problem with that. So regardless of what avenue you go, we think Lord Mu has the most consistent path to victory. Now, you could argue a bunch of different scenarios, obviously. We just think no matter what, like Virtue said, you could just say he puts it into a 1v1 no matter what, in which case he has like that best chance of winning. I think honestly like encapsulates this discussion. Any closing thoughts to the video?
Go subscribe to ThunderGod. That's about it.
Thank you for Virtue for coming on. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I know it was a longer one. If you wanted me to go more in depth with some of these, I apologize. The video was quite literally an hour long, and I tried to touch everything a little bit, but I couldn't really too. So let me know what you guys thoughts. Let me know who you guys have winning. That's the important thing. Give me your scenario down below. Let me know who you guys think wins each one, and then who you have as your overall winner. With that being said, I'll catch you next time.